Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to Ep.2 of the Volpe Creates show. I am your host, Chris Volpe, joined as always by baby girl. There she is. Uh, Today we have a special guest, George, joining us. The Volpe Creates show is where we talk about video games, the game industry, and I think we've got a lot of fun stuff to discuss this week. But before we get started, George, thank you for joining us. We have been, I don't know, colleagues, I guess, for several
Yeah,
years now,
yeah, in
growing
2017, something
closer
like
all
that.
the time.
Yeah.
But why don't you give a little background about yourself for our guests?
So I'm presently the CEO of Digimancy Entertainment, which I founded with a couple partners back in 2019. Before that, I was in the industry for about 20 years, a long time narrative designer, area designer, general designer and writer of mostly RPGs. And it's been about 20 years, and I've mostly worked at In Exile and Obsidian. So long background in RPG creation, and now Digimancy is also designed to be a company that focuses in the kind of games that I've loved and been working on for years, which is narrative-focused RPGs.
So RPGs are your jam. You didn't just fall into it and get sucked into it.
No, no. What I got sucked into at the very beginning of my career was MMOs, because it was like get a job in the industry, do whatever you need to do to get in. And then I sort of slowly positioned myself to get a job at making sort of more traditional single player RPGs at Obsidian, and then that's kind of been my thing ever since.
That's awesome. So a big part of why I started this show was to talk about and introduce people to this process of creating game studios, creating games. There's a lot of content out there in the world about the games industry and people talking about their thoughts on various games. But I didn't see a lot of YouTubers or streamers or anything talking about like the daily nuts and bolts of making a studio, which I know is something I've been doing for over a decade now, which is kind of mind blowing.
Yeah.
But also, you have stepped foot into creating your own business. So what's that been like these past couple of years?
It's been a learning experience. So we're kind of getting some feedback.
If we
Um,
can, I think we can hear you.
Uh, it's definitely been a learning experience. So I started out knowing almost nothing about running a business. It was just kind of like, yeah, we can do this. It was me and a couple partners, and pretty much starting from scratch. I think the leg up that we had, or a couple legs up that we had, was number one. We'd all been working in the industry for, at that time, 15 to 20 years for, I think, all three of us. So we knew a lot of people. So we were able to call on people that we knew and liked and trusted and enjoyed working with in the past, who could come and join us, to at least create that like core initial group. Um, and then the other leg up that I had was mentors, because I had worked at some large companies, very successful RPG studios. The CEOs and other senior people of some of those companies were very happy to serve as mentors and guides for me, and refer me to specialists that they knew and lawyers and that sort of thing, who could give me a lot of pointers along the way. So it was a combination of just sort of getting on the internet and being like, how do you start a business? How should you organize your studio? Which I screwed up in a couple ways, but you make lots of mistakes along the way. But the good thing was I did have the help of some of those people who'd been doing it for a long time, and that helped me to avoid, I think, probably some mistakes that I would not have that I would have made, but was able to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, I started, my background's healthcare. So I was in the healthcare industry for many years, and um, I had no experience starting a business. So I've probably made just about every mistake you can make, I think. So far, nothing catastrophic that's
Yep.
closed us down, which I'll take as a win. But yeah, it truly is a learning experience, and that's kind of why I wanted to have you on this week is, in addition to just your experience making cool games, I wanted to chat with you just about the game studio setup. And one of the things I think is cool. So for those viewers who are unaware, I am located in Columbus, Ohio, and you are right down the street. So a lot of people don't think about Ohio as a mecca of game design or development, but that's something that I've been pushing for the past decade, because we have so much talent, got a lot of passion, and I think that's been seen through things like GDEX, our expo, which has been getting bigger and bigger. And now I believe it's the largest expo of its kind in the Midwest. So there's no shortage of talent, but I mean, I think it just us being new to the sphere. There's probably some things that we need to keep in mind or learn. Like, what have you noticed or experienced as you've tried to start building your studio here in Ohio and the Midwest? Are like what are some directions and angles that we could start going to maybe be more competitive in the landscape?
So I think that one of the key things about our studio is that we started this as a remote only studio. We actually started the studio before, just before COVID, and we thought we were sort of ahead of the game with like, hey, we can. This is one of our selling points is you can be remote, or obviously you could live here. Um, and then COVID happened, and then everybody's remote. So we do have people worldwide. We have some people international. We have some people from the U.S. Um, Early on, I think it seemed like it would be difficult to get people on the coasts, which is where a lot of the game industry people are, to move to Ohio. Um, the Probably the biggest selling point of Ohio is that it's not on the coast, and therefore it's less expensive and it's less crazy. And you sort of, if you want to live in a place that is a little less intense, you can do that here. But obviously Columbus sort of has a mix of it's got a city and it has resources and it has things to do, but it's not like you're paying $3,500 a month for an apartment in Southern California. So that we have going for us. I think one of the things I've noticed is that there are people here who want to get into the game industry very badly, but they don't want to leave Ohio. And so a lot of them have sort of assumed that they are going to have to only do games as a hobby, and they won't be able to get into it professionally. And so that's essentially what they do. And some of them might be trying to do little indie efforts on the side, but they they end up having to take jobs in other industries that maybe they're not as excited about. And now I think with Multivarious and with us and with Exultant and a few other studios that are in this general area, I think there are more options. And the more people that we can, like the more experienced people we can get associated with our studios, and then bring in some of the more junior people in this area who haven't yet gotten that like professional industry experience, and then build the experience base here, I think the better off we're going to be in terms of setting up sort of um, a group of people here that can continue to grow and be self-sustaining.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I mean, these things, these issues we talk about, these challenges are not like they're everywhere. If you're not in kind of California and one of the hubs for the games industry, film has been the same way. If you're not in Hollywood, it's hard to get into it, or New York. And we saw like Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia in particular, has seen a really big rise in film and animation coming out of there because the state put in efforts to cultivate that. And I'm totally blanking on The Walking Dead. There, I was trying to think of the show. The Walking Dead is notorious for being associated with the Made in Georgia thing. And so I'm always thinking, how do we create a something similar to Made in Georgia or whatever for the gaming space here in Ohio? Like, how do we develop that? And it's probably going to be a slow crawl at first. One of my big challenges, and I'm curious, maybe you have an answer or a take on this, is the games industry it's a new industry relatively when you compare it to other
Mm-hmm.
ones, but it's also in the entertainment space, which is something that Ohio in particular and the Midwest in general doesn't spend a lot of time putting resources into. So film, gaming, music, different types of sort of art performance. It's not a high priority for cities, and funders typically aren't familiar enough with our industry. I've raised money for various reasons for various companies, and it's very hard to find a local institutional investor who has any experience in the gaming space at all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if they don't have an experience, they're going to be hesitant. So I don't know if you have any thoughts, like how can we, I guess, make it seem more comfortable for folks who aren't familiar with the games industry to sort of see, I hate to say like see the light, but see the potential and see this upcoming industry, um, and get them excited into it. Do you have any thoughts on that? It's kind of a large, loaded question, but
So it is a hard question. I think it depends upon who you're trying to appeal to. One thing
people
I'll
with money.
back up, people with money. Okay. One thing I'll back up a little bit in terms of getting game companies to come here or to invest here is actually very easy. A lot of game companies and a lot of the people who work in games um, have are increasingly frustrated with the cost of living in places like Southern California and San Francisco. I've been there. I was in Southern California for 10 years, 15 years, something like that. So I know from a lot of the people who work in the industry that it's gotten it is frustrating to pay the kind of rents and the cost of living that they have out there. So something that New Orleans did was they put in place some very strong tax and business incentives in Louisiana to try to get companies to relocate there. And in fact, as soon as companies became aware of that, um, they immediately jumped on it. So I was working at In Exile at the time that stuff was happening, and In Exile opened up a branch office in New Orleans, which is still going. High Voltage Studios in Chicago did the same thing. I think a couple others did too. Um, so that was a very smart move on the part of New Orleans. Most game companies will jump on stuff like that very quickly. So if Ohio did something like that, I think you would very rapidly see some studios very interested in Columbus, Ohio. In terms of how to get government people or people with money excited about the game industry. So one thing that Ohio is already doing, and I don't know what effect this will have, but there's this giant Intel plant that is going to be opening up right here, not far from where I am, actually in New Albany. Um, and seeing like um, well-educated, relatively wealthy people coming in to the area and property property values rising and all that sort of thing is certainly one way that I think you could that the city and the area will see benefits. And I would think the money people would kind of grok that. But I'm not a money person, and I don't know very many money people, so I don't know. We
Yeah,
get more funding through publishers.
yeah. I think the first part of what you said is very astute. If we can get companies to move here, like the easy wins, I talk about Intel. The easy win is always attract a company.
Yep.
That's what the government wants, right? They want someone to come in and create jobs, come in and create jobs. So that's always the easier win is can we get a company to come here? I don't know, like can we get an Ubisoft or something to put a satellite office here, for
Hmm.
example? I just
Hmm.
pulled that name out of the air. Uh, so I think those are always, when I talk about that kind of thing, I can see their eyes begin to light up. They start to think about it, right? But then I want to be able to focus on building out the sort of established smaller mid-sized studios that we already have here, right?
Hmm.
Because we already have a lot of people with talent and dedication, that could be starting up their own businesses or joining Digimancy or Multivarious or whatever. Um, but we have to build that up. And it seems like from the conversations I've had, I talk to people in the industry or whatever, that we all get it, right? Like we already get games. Like we don't have to explain. I mean, there's a reason you're on this show, right? It's because you like
Mhm.
video games and you're in the industry. So we don't have to explain it to each other. But it's an industry that just seems to have a very stark barrier between it. Some of it's generational, but not all of it. Where just some people get games and they see the power and the potential of them, and other people are just like, I don't get it. And some of that's on us because we haven't always had how do we say we haven't always had the best branding and image,
Yeah,
we could say, as
yeah,
gamers and as studios, even large studios. I mean, we talked about Activision,
yep.
Blizzard last week. They've been having all sorts of issues, uh, like through their HR and stuff. But I want to figure out a way. How do we get people excited? How do we show them? And maybe the answer is just start out with just making jobs. Maybe we don't need to get them excited, other than we can be like, hey, Ubisoft coming here is going to make 100 jobs or whatever. If anyone at
Mhm.
Ubisoft's watching, feel free to hit me up and we can bring you out to Columbus. Um, but I want to make sure that the message is about growing the industry and all the phases. It's not just about bringing a large company here. It's also about supporting the companies that have been here for a long time and wanting to push. So that's why that's sort of my long rambling response to what you were saying about connecting and bringing work here, because using your networks, and if there are people out in the coast that, I mean, you're not the first person by far that I have talked to that has spent a sizable amount of their career out of Ohio and then has
Mhm.
moved either to Ohio for the first time or back because they lived here, because they just don't want to live in San Francisco. Nothing in San Francisco, but they don't want to live with those prices. They don't want to spend $4,000 a month on a one bedroom apartment. So that opportunity exists. I'm wondering, do you think that COVID? I saw there was an article yesterday on CNN about a couple businesses that are they're just going to remote work permanently. They're like, this is the new norm now.
Yep.
Do you think COVID might open up some of those opportunities to do what you were talking about?
I think it's a mixed bag. So on the one hand, yes, like there are a lot of people at tech companies and game companies that are talking to um, their bosses and saying, "Hey, I would like to go back to my hometown, or I would like to go live in some place that I've always wanted to live, Colorado, whatever." And then because of COVID, companies are much friendlier toward that. And there's some places that are saying right now they're never going to go back to a requirement of having everybody on site. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it might be. Um, the other side of it um, is because you can live anywhere, it's hard to create an ecosystem anywhere. So like one of the reasons that there are a lot of game companies in, say, Southern California or Boston, or you kind of get these like Austin, Texas, you kind of get these little ecosystems of a whole bunch of companies appearing there, is once you have a critical mass, it's very easy for, okay, well, project just got canceled. Um, I'm living in Irvine, California. There's like five other places within, a short driving distance of my apartment that I can potentially go to work for instead of having to move all the way to Montreal or something like that. So um, that tends to be, at least in my experience, why these pockets appear, because it's like all the game people, they'll have a little community, like even outside of like the work part, like they'll be in Southern California. We had beer Wednesdays at the local pub where like all the game people
Oh,
would go and
nice.
hang out. It was great, yeah. And then you'd meet people from all the other studios, and that increased the cross pollination. Like we had so many people who'd go from In Exile to Obsidian to Blizzard to Blind Squirrel. There was like a whole bunch of studios right there. And a lot of these pockets of the game industry have that. And I think that tends to be one of the secrets to creating a place where a lot of game people want to come. So like if Columbus got, if Exultant blew up and Digimancy blew up and Multivarious blew up and we got, some other studios coming here, all of a sudden we have an ecosystem and people can move here to Columbus and they don't have to worry that like, oh, if the project gets canceled or if I get laid off or whatever, crap, I'm going to have to move all the way back to Southern California. No, they could just stay here and they can feel more secure and they could buy a house because that's always a thing in the game industry, at least the years I've been in. It's like, I never bought a house. I was living in California because it was always like, oh, who knows? Next week I could get, project could get canceled and I'll have to move to Boston or something. So having that like little ecosystem is a way to really get something rooted. And I think that is probably going to be harder to do now that we have COVID and there's just people living anywhere. So I think that's a challenge. I don't think it's insurmountable, but I think it makes it tougher.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take on it. Because yeah, I would assume. I mean, moving is always super hard, particularly if you got a family, right? Like it's the last thing. I hate moving. I personally hate moving, so it's like the last thing I want to do if I can avoid it. But yeah, getting that critical mass, and I think the issue that we've had in Ohio is we've got these great educational programs, and Columbus in particular is a huge tech city. We're also a big city. We're larger than San Francisco population size, but without that opportunity, that talent has to trickle out somewhere, and so it ends up leaving the ecosystem that we've cultivated over the long run. So figuring out a way to stymie that would be great. Not to stop people from opportunities, but providing those opportunities here. Um, but I do agree with you. I think if we can get just people even thinking about Columbus the way they think about Austin,
Yep.
that's a huge benefit. At least just being like, oh, there's stuff going on. There's a couple companies that we can use for resources. And that will make the other thing we were talking about, the attraction, the Ubisoft attraction or whatever, it makes that a lot easier. Because those companies, even with tax incentives, they're not going to open up a satellite office in a place that they're not sure they can maintain talent at.
Mm-hmm.
So if they don't feel that Columbus is going to be able to provide the tech talent that they need, why would they open up here? And I think that's one of the battles that we've been fighting is Columbus has. I mean, we've got like top tier. If you're just thinking about tech, we have top tier talent, but it's all in very specific, like, IT infrastructure, healthcare, insurance and banking, fintech, that kind of stuff. Very little of it is focused on entertainment tech or what I call like creative technology. So the tools of the trade that we use, like Unity and Unreal and whatever else, although the skill sets are transferable between some of those other businesses, the specializations generally aren't. And so that's it's like, if you need someone who knows how to use Photoshop, then like you need someone who knows how to use Photoshop, and if they don't know how to use it, it doesn't matter how good they are at whatever. So that can be a problem. So I'm glad to see, I'm teaching at Columbus State and Shawnee State, and I'm seeing more and more students in Miami and OU. Kent's got a great program. So we're starting to see the education side of it. So we just got to figure out a way to lasso these kids and keep them here so we can start using them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them want to. Like I've, right now Digimancy is relatively small, and so we're not in a position to be like, yes, we need 30 junior people tomorrow. But as our companies grow, a lot of the kids that I've talked to at Shawnee and other places are very interested in staying in the area. Certainly staying in Ohio, and for them, for example, for kids at Shawnee, easy enough to move up to Columbus. They're not super far away from their families. They're still in the same area. Very different. I think a good number of them probably would be more reluctant to move out to California or something like that because it's a really big difference. So cultivating and not even just preventing that local talent from going off to California, but preventing that local talent from trickling out into other industries. It's sort of deciding, oh, the whole game, I wanted to be a game programmer, but there's just not enough opportunities. I guess I'll go work for Cardinal Health or something, right? Instead of that, maybe those people will stay in games and continue to pursue the dream. Um, and that would be the goal of trying to spin up more activity here and like growing that local talent, which is something that I've been, well, you and I both have been excited about.
Yeah, we just got to, I guess, keep banging that drum and see if we can get other people to follow along. I'm a part of. I mean, I can't tell you how many working groups and steering committees I'm a part of here in the city, working with the Film Commission, the Music Commission, Greater Columbus Arts Council, and all sorts of folks to get people thinking about gaming. And I've seen some cool stuff around VR lately in Columbus, where one of my friends, Brian Moss, he was an artist in residence with the Greater Columbus Arts Council, and he's done some really cool stuff using VR for like art. So that's really neat. So we're starting to see other places, and some of the companies are beginning to support, like White Castle, local headquartered here, is been willing to put some money towards using our types of technology to create experiences. So I'm definitely seeing a lot of positive movement. I always just feel like the game space. I gave a TEDx talk, I don't know how many years ago, and the last slide I put on there was an old image of Elvis, and that image always stuck with me because I was like, that we don't think anything of Elvis right now. Nothing against Elvis, but like everyone knows who Elvis is. Everyone knows what rock and roll is. Like nobody debates anymore that rock and roll is music, right? Like that's not even a conversation. And I feel like video games are in that bucket where the people that get it, just like people who got rock and roll. Now we need to get it over that hump to where it's just a common thing. So like I went to OU before COVID, like 2.5 years ago, and we were at a bar, and I was just listening to these. It was a couple of younger people, and they were just talking about video games as if it was just like they'd grown up with it since day one, right?
Yep.
It was such a part of them that it was just like a computer. It's just, of course everyone uses a computer. Of course everybody plays video games. So if we can get the industry to that point where just people kind of understand its power, and I firmly believe that video games are the next like big storytelling medium for humanity. I think that we're starting to see, and maybe this is because narrative design and storytelling is that's your shtick, right? That's your love.
It is.
So maybe, hopefully you share this, but like, I think it's really cool. We're starting to see games that are like top tier storytelling experiences, narrative experiences, which, when we were growing up, there were great games, but like, most games were not trying to do, they weren't using like complex narrative devices. They weren't like dealing with adult subjects or themes. There wasn't a lot of like sort of internal character struggle besides like, you stole my girlfriend and now I got to go beat you up kind of thing. You killed my father, prepare to die. That's not the case anymore though. There's some amazing stuff out there. Obsidian's known for doing those kind of games. And then I think you've worked with some of the Disco Elysium folks as well, which has come out to an unbelievable like amount of critical praise. I think that game came out 2 years ago. I think 2 or 3 years ago.
It's about 2 years ago. Yeah.
And that received a ton of. There's my cat.
It feels just like a company meeting now with cats showing up on everybody's screens.
I know people are probably like thinking that like I'm going crazy because I'm bouncing around, but like my cat wants to play fetch, and then my dog has to sit on my lap. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing here at the Volpe Creates Show studio. But anyway, like I'm really excited to see what kind of narrative-based games are coming out. I'm super excited for like the new God of War come out, The Last of Us. Like I cannot tell you how excited I am for the HBO show. Like I just
Yes.
I hope it's good, um, but I mean,
Well,
what about you? What do you think about like games and their impact on sort of storytelling and culture?
so certainly, well, first of all, I agree completely in terms of, the way narrative has evolved in games. When I when I started in the industry in 2001, um, I actually started out as a writer, and most studios did not even have writer positions. It was like the text in the game and the story of the game would be written by, if you were lucky, a designer. If you were not lucky, an executive, or a programmer, or something like that. So it was still fairly uncommon, and things have obviously changed tremendously since then. Um, I will say though that I think there's a there's a there's a divergence. So there are games with very strong stories, but they are still very linear stories. Um, so there are games, Last of Us, a lot of the sort of big FPS type stories, very well done. They evoke emotion, but what they're not doing is they're not really taking advantage of what this medium can do. Like they're still telling stories in a fairly traditional manner. Like they're still basically a linear story. It's almost like you're watching a movie, but you're playing the action sequences, right? There's like a lot of
Sure,
that in games, right? Then there are games, Disco Elysium's a good example, and a lot of stuff that I've been working on where we really do take advantage of player choice, right? Where it's a collaborative story that you're telling with the player. It sort of comes more out of the tradition of D&D, being a game master, and you are collaborating with your group in telling a collective story. So there are games that are trying to do that. Now it's very hard to do both of those things well. It's very hard to have high production values, and making sure that every moment is sort of got that cinematic impact, and emotional impact, and also having the allowing the player to choose, and the story can branch and change based upon what the player wants to do. So those are two different approaches. I've tended to go to the latter. And we're starting to get to the point where that second approach is delivering more of an emotional impact. Sometimes can deliver the sort of cinematic impact too, but probably not at the production values of a Last of Us. And
well, I
I do.
mean, how many companies are Naughty Dog, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the very high cost of doing that means that Naughty Dog generally ends up having to do linear storytelling, right? Where it's like the player's
yeah,
doing the action sequences, but the actual story stuff is happening in cutscenes and forced interaction. So I am particularly excited as a creator to do the second kind, where you're collaborating with the player to tell a story, and empowering the player to make decisions and branch their story, and determine how their story is going to play out. I feel like that is really what this medium can do that no other storytelling medium can accomplish.
yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to push maybe back slightly because I remember, I don't remember, it was one of the books I read, but somebody called video games like empathy generators. It was this term in one of the books I was reading.
Yep.
Um, I think it might have been Extra Lives, but that really got me thinking because I think there is power in the game's ability to create meaningful choice and player-driven decisions that lead you on something. I think The Witcher 3, for example, it's got some pretty
Hmm.
amazing moments where your decision as a player has a fundamental change in the game that you don't even know about until you're talking to somebody else and they're like, "Oh no, I totally destroyed that town." You're like, "Wait, you can destroy that town?" You
Yep.
know? Um, but I think that one of the things that all games can be really good at is that like it's almost like the mind body connection when you're working out, that like visceral feel. And The Last of Us, I remember this very specifically where I was like, holy crap, the original Last of Us game is like, it got me. Is a
Hmm.
scene where you're in a car and you get jumped, and this guy's coming to grab one of the main characters, and the other main character has to stop him. And like, there's just the way that that scene flows, and then kind of moves from a cutscene into action into you having to do something. Like, it really got you into that character where you're like, oh yeah, I have to go and save this person. in a way that like movies just can't do. Like there's just a thing that games can do that can like bring you into this. And I love movies, but it's like it's a different type of experience. Like movies, to your point about cutscenes, you can like determine the beats and figure out. My undergrad is in photography, fine arts photography, so like you spend a lot of time thinking about framing, and because what you decide to put
Hmm.
in the frame is what the viewer is going to take away from the image, what you choose to or not put in there. And that's what movies are, right? Like particularly somebody like Christopher Nolan, you look at his movies, he's very specific and deliberate. Stanley Kubrick is another one,
Oh yeah.
very deliberate on how he frames. And he's famous for the phrase "every frame's a painting."
Yep.
Um, and games can do that, but they also can't. Like it's a lot harder to kind of like hide. You can't hide the man behind the curtain as much sometimes in games without it seeming like you were just on a roller coaster ride, right?
Yep. Yep.
But then the other part of that is I would love to see more experiences that are tailored to you. I think Mass Effect was probably, I don't know. I think Mass Effect was probably the biggest experiment in that like fully featured player design, three massive high production value games. Um, I don't think they necessarily nailed the landing, but
No,
like,
they did not, but they tried
yeah,
really hard. Um,
yeah, and a lot of it is, I mean, there aren't games that have tried to do that on such a scale, or there's very few, I should say, that have tried to do that on such a scale, because to your point, it's hard. Like
it's
just
expensive.
keeping all those threads together.
Yeah, it's expensive and it is hard too. But one thing that you said that is a really good point is I think you referred to games as an empathy generator, and I think you're right
Yeah,
about that. Like I think being in being literally in a character's shoes and running around and controlling them and being in that world, as opposed to just seeing characters running around on a screen, in a movie theater. I think you're right um, that does increase your empathy with the characters and what they're going through more so than you otherwise would have. So that is a very good point as to another thing that I think games do well um, over and above
yeah.
movies and books and that sort of thing.
I think like there's some amazing Spec Ops: The Line is another game that I think just does not get the wide credit it deserves.
Mm.
Even like Bioshock, where they almost use the facade of the game to, I hesitate to say trick you, because I think all storytelling is sort of a form of a trick in a way, it's trying to get you down an emotional road. But I think games can be really good about using and playing with that idea. And you mentioned, you're in a character's shoes. I think that's one of the things, without spoiling here, about what The Last of Us does is it almost forces you as the player to come to terms with the fact that like these characters are not you.
Hmm.
Whereas for a long, long period in gaming, and still a lot today, uh, you just you were like in an empty vessel, right? And that vessel, like was you. You got to make the decisions. You got to make the whatever. And now we're seeing this little divide of games where it's like, no, you are taking part in someone else's story. So the trick and the storytelling becomes less about how do we offer the players choices and more about how do we get the player to emotionally be aligned with the character,
Hmm.
um, which is another challenge in and of itself,
Yeah.
which I think is really, really crazy.
And
Um,
this is also something that in RPG circles, especially the kind of RPGs that I make, this is we're always talking about this. Is like who should the protagonist be? And of course, we're in that space. We're in that more like open worldy, make lots of choices, collaborative storytelling kind of space. And then you have games like The Witcher, right, where you are playing as Geralt, and Geralt has a past, and Geralt has things about him that you as the player don't know. So you are stepping into his shoes just as you would a character in The Last of Us. And then you've got on the other side I'm creating my party entirely from scratch, and all of these people are mean nothing. They have no connection to the game world, right? They're only in my head. And then there's sort of this in between realm. Mass Effect is sort of in it, but it's closer to the Geralt side, I guess. But it's like where you are creating your character, or you're creating a good chunk of your character, but you also have the option to say things, to make some decisions about your background, right? So like I could say, oh, I was a veteran of such and such a war, or I was a smuggler or something like that. So you've kind of got like, there's this continuum. And I think we in the RPG space are sort of trying to figure out how best to use each of those different approaches
Yeah.
and what we can and can't do with all of them. For a long time in RPGs, it was sort of assumed, oh, you have to have the player create their own characters, or they're just not going to care. And that's been questioned a lot by games like Disco Elysium and The Witcher and some other games more recently, where you are stepping into a specific character's shoes. So it's an interesting problem that we're still wrestling with.
Yeah, yeah. Bioshock had that where the first character was like an empty vessel, and then you play as Booker in the third one.
Yeah.
And I think they really like the first one being an empty vessel was kind of supposed to be like an allegory of the player being this,
Yep.
but like you were supposed to be one and the same. But then of course Booker in the third one is he's his own person that you are playing as. A game along these lines that I think relatively recent was the Outer Worlds. I think I really enjoy it, and yep, and I think that was a game that like you could see the foundation of something great in there. You know, they didn't quite hit it, not because of talent. It was just their first go around, so they were building a lot of new systems, and obviously there was a lot of Fallout. You want to get down, sweetheart? A lot of Fallout inspiration in there and stuff.
Sure.
And so like when I played that, I was like, oh wow, I could see that like they can take this foundation they made and really build something on top of it. Because I think, in my opinion, I think the Outer Worlds is way better than like Fallout 3 and 4. Maybe not as deep or complex in certain ways, but like it's cleaner, it runs better. The characters I think are well written and dynamic. And I feel like it gets rid of a lot of like the nitpickiness that Fallout has in certain regards. Just the fiddliness. But I want to see more of those games that really can do what you're saying. Like, how can you construct this world and these characters, and then when you're done with it, you feel like that was your story, like that was the way things happened to you. And that's a real hard thing to do. Over the course of a 40-hour game or whatever, that's a really hard like thing to keep going. And unfortunately, go ahead.
I was going to say RPGs are really hard to make, and Obsidian has been doing it for a lot of years, which is why I think you had a pretty good experience in Outer Worlds.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell that the crew there, you could tell it was a labor of love, right? They understood the influences that they were coming from. They tried to smooth over the rough edges, and you could tell the people that were on the team like actually cared about what they were making, But one of the things that I'm curious on your thought is that I think both you and I share this sort of mutual love of these types of games, but in general, they're not the best selling games.
Nope.
And I think that makes it challenging where you don't see, you'll see an Obsidian who is, I don't know, a double A level developer.
I think they've become AAA, but they started out more, I would call them AA.
Yeah. But you don't see like many AAA, like even the Witcher 3, right? Like CD Projekt Red, like the Witcher 3, I think made them a AAA developer.
Yes.
But they were not before that.
No.
And then after Cyberpunk, I think a lot of people are wondering if they still are. But which I thought I like that game, but it had its issues. But do you think we'll see? Is this something that maybe over time will circle around through the market? Will circle around to these, or do you think it will always kind of be in this niche? Do you think we'll see another Mass Effect budgeted style RPG like the ones we've been talking about?
Yeah, I actually do. So I think it's going to be so RPGs are, and these sort of narrative focused RPGs are a strange space in the sense that they span, I think, the sort of A, double A, and triple A. And I think there's always going to be room for those big triple A games. I know Cyberpunk didn't turn out as they hoped, but if Cyberpunk had come out stronger and had been like more of a Witcher 3 level polish and quality and everything else, I think it would have been huge. Like there is a space for those
Oh,
games,
totally.
undoubtedly. It is hard and expensive to make them though, so I don't think there's ever going to be a gazillion of them. Like I think it's always going to be there'll be a few of them, and and then there'll be a lot more in the sort of double A and single A space. And I think there's room for all of that. Like that's totally fine. I like Digimancy is probably more in the double A, and that's kind of what we're shooting for right now. The triple A games take a lot of people to make and a lot of effort and a lot of money. Um, I don't. I think it's going to continue. I don't think people are ever going to get tired of the sort of story-focused types of games,
Hmm.
but they're just not going to be super common. There's just going to be a few of them at that AAA level.
Yeah, totally. And I'm not saying like as well, maybe you got potties. I need to wrap up here. That AAA is better than AA or anything, because a lot of the best games that I've played are in that space. I'm just always curious, and I know we've got I'm totally blanking on it. What is Microsoft's big Starfield? That
Yeah,
could
that's
be
a good
something.
example. Yep. Yep.
That could be something. I know Fable has tried again and again and never
Yep.
quite, I think, reached that level of like, excellence. People of Skyrim. I don't know
Mhm.
if you could release a Skyrim. I don't think you could release a Skyrim as a Skyrim today, and it would receive the same amount of praise. Um, I don't know if that made any sense. Like Skyrim's great, right? But it is a
Yeah.
clunky, buggy mess. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people who love Skyrim love it despite a lot of its flaws,
Mhm.
which is fine. There's plenty of games that I like that
So
I generally can't recommend to other people, but I just happen to love the game. You know?
one of the biggest problems I think with the true open world games, right? So like there's Outer Worlds, which is not really a true open world game. That's sort of
Yeah.
more focused and directed. But the true open world games is that nowadays, like not a lot of people have time for 160-hour experiences. And I think that is I don't know about like I don't remember what year now Skyrim came out, maybe 2008 or 9 or something, but um, there even then there were fewer games coming out every day.
Yeah.
And there's just not as many people like when I was a kid playing the old guy card. Um, there were very few games coming out per year, so like you could reliably spend a lot of time in a single game and not feel like, oh my God, I got to play these other 86 things that might be interesting to me. It just seems harder and harder to market games that are like, yes, it's this giant open world and you're going to spend months and months playing it because very few people actually want to do that. So these sort of shorter, more directed experiences, at least in my opinion, are kind of a better bet.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, man, unfortunately, I think we're getting close to the end here. I could talk to you
Yeah,
for
no,
another couple of hours
yeah,
here.
it was fun.
Um,
I keep talking too.
yeah, I want to thank you for being a part of the show. Is there anything you want to say to the audience? Any places they can reach you, or anything that you want to, any websites or anything that you want to share?
Sure. I mean, if you want to check out our company, we have a website. It's going to be renovated soon. It's not much to look at right now, but it's www.digimancygames.com. That's our company. We also have a Twitter, which is I believe at Digimancy Games. And I'm on Twitter too at gzites. I don't post a lot, but I should post more. But we're actually getting in a social media person to run our Digimancy Games account, so there'll be more activity there in the future, hopefully soon.
Awesome. All right. Well, that is episode 2 of the Volpe Creates show. I want to thank you, George, for coming and being a part of it.
My
I
pleasure.
also want to take a hot second and let Lucas, are you with us? Our
Yes, I am.
intern producer.
Hello.
So you've been spearheading this ship for this episode. So I want to thank you, and he'll be working with us for the next, 3 or 4 months here.
Yeah, for quite a while.
Awesome. So thank you, Lucas, for helping out. And again, you can see us on the Twitch and the YouTubes at Volpe Creates. You can also go to volpecreates.com, and you can go to volpecreates.com/Discord. That will give you access to our Discord channel where you can hang out, you can chat, you can also ask questions during our conversations if you have anything that you want to ask. But other than that, this has been episode 2. Thank you all. George, thank you again, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Well, everyone, thank you for tuning on in. Just want to remind everyone to like, follow, subscribe, and follow us on Twitter. We thank you for your time, and we hope you have a great day.